Betrayed and abandoned. How I turned my husband's threats against him. When I first met Dan, he seemed like a dream. We were young and passionate, and it felt like we were on top of the world. Our first house together felt like the start of a fairy tale, a symbol of our hard work and shared dreams. 10 years of marriage had only deepened my sense of security, or so I thought. But, as the years passed, subtle cracks began to show, and everything came crashing down one cold evening that I'll never forget. The distance had started months before. I thought it was just a rough patch, one of those slumps that couples go through. He was coming home later than usual, missing family gatherings, and sometimes not coming home at all. If I asked about it, he'd shrug me off, saying I was nagging or that I needed to relax. I tried to convince myself that things would improve, that maybe he was under work stress, and that it was just a phase. One evening while Dan was in the shower, a text notification lit up his phone on the dresser. The name Sophia appeared, along with a message that made my stomach twist. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I knew I shouldn't look further, but I couldn't stop myself. The messages painted a devastating picture, one that I could no longer ignore. This wasn't a fling or a misunderstanding. He had been seeing her, and from the messages, it seemed they were closer than I ever imagined. When he emerged from the shower, I confronted him, clutching his phone in my hand. He looked at me with an unbothered expression, the coldest stare I'd ever seen. "Yes, I'm with her," he admitted, barely flinching. "Her name's Sophia, and I'm tired of sneaking around." I felt like I was going to collapse. "You're tired of sneaking around?" I managed to choke out. "Dan, we built this life together. We've shared a decade, and you're telling me that you want to throw it all away for some affair?" He laughed, as though my words were some sort of childish plea. "Oh, come on. You make it sound so dramatic. Let's be real, we're done. You're clinging to something that isn't there anymore." The walls seemed to close in on me, but his next words were even colder, each one a dagger to my heart. "I need you to leave," he said, voice flat. "I want Sophia to move in here with me. It's easier that way, and you can find somewhere else. If you refuse, I'll make sure this divorce is a living hell for you." The casual cruelty of it left me reeling. Here was the man I'd devoted my life to, asking me to leave my own home so he could bring in his mistress. It was as if he no longer recognized me as his partner, only as an inconvenience to be swept aside. In that moment, I felt a surge of defiance rising within me. I nodded slowly, masking my rage with a calm expression. "Fine, Dan. If that's what you want, then I'll leave, but on my own terms." With that, I walked out of the room, and for the next week, I put my own plan into action. I didn't cry, and I didn't argue. Instead, I hired a lawyer and began gathering every document, every financial statement, and every piece of evidence I could find. I spent hours reviewing our assets, realizing just how much I had contributed to this home, both financially and emotionally. I was more prepared than I ever thought possible. After days of planning, I returned home to find Sophia sitting comfortably on my couch, sipping from a mug that I had bought, as if she already owned the place. Dan sat beside her, looking smug, clearly believing I'd come to surrender. "Have you packed your bags yet?" he asked with an infuriating smirk. I took a deep breath, letting every bit of fury and pain fuel my resolve. "Actually, I'm not going anywhere." Dan's smile faded, and Sophia looked confused. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Legally, I co-own this house. You can't force me to leave, and if you try to move her in here, it'll be grounds for a brutal divorce settlement. Every penny you thought you'd keep? Think again." He looked stunned. "You wouldn't do that. You'd drag us both through that mess?" "Oh, believe me, Dan, I'm prepared." "I didn't want this, but you forced my hand." Sophia looked uncomfortable, glancing at Dan, who was now visibly panicked. She muttered something about needing some air and quickly grabbed her things, leaving Dan alone to face the consequences. For the first time, he looked uncertain, as if realizing that I wasn't the naive wife he could walk all over. The next few days were tense. He oscillated between anger and attempts to placate me, trying to convince me to just move on, or claiming he never meant for things to get this ugly. But I'd heard enough. His betrayal, his cruelty, and his utter disregard for our life together had left scars that I could never ignore. When the divorce proceedings began, it was clear Dan hadn't anticipated my resolve. I fought for everything, standing my ground with a strength I didn't know I had. My lawyer was relentless, ensuring that Dan would face the financial consequences of his choices. And with every court date, every signed document, I felt the weight of the betrayal lift from my shoulders. Eventually, the house was mine. Dan had lost everything he thought he could keep, including me. I later heard that Sophia, tired of the complications and Dan's newfound financial instability, moved on to someone else, leaving him in a pit of his own making. For a while, I wasn't sure how I would recover from the pain. It's not easy to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by betrayal. But in time, I learned to value my own strength, my resilience. The house I'd fought so hard to keep became my sanctuary, a symbol of my triumph over the heartbreak and manipulation I had endured. Today I stand on my own, free of the burdens of a marriage that was built on deceit. I've transformed my home into a place of peace and renewal, filling it with memories of laughter and friendships, with reminders of my own worth and courage. Dan's betrayal taught me the harsh reality of his character, but it also showed me just how capable I am. And as for him, he's left with nothing but the life he tried to create out of lies and cruelty, while I've emerged stronger, wiser, and finally, free. When Sarah discovered her husband's affair, she thought the betrayal couldn't hurt more until he demanded she leave their home to make way for his mistress. Threatened with divorce and left with nowhere to turn, Sarah takes a stand, uncovering her inner strength and reclaiming her life. In a battle of love and loss, betrayal and resilience, she turns her husband's ultimatum into a surprising victory. This is a story of courage, survival, and the power of self-worth in the face of devastating betrayal.